Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the SALTCONF 21 Bigger, Better, Faster, Stronger Keynote presentation. To kick off this year's keynote, please welcome Purnima Padmanabhan, Senior Vice President and General Manager of VMware's Cloud Management Business Unit.
Hello, everyone, for joining us from all over the world for SALTCONF 21. I'm excited to be here, and I'm glad that you're able to participate in our Bigger, Better, Faster, Stronger conference. The conference theme almost has a Darwinian principle behind it, and which has played out in the last 2 years. If you look at the companies that have truly been agile, that have been fast to innovate, are the ones that have come out bigger, better, and stronger. And that is the theme of this conference. Truly, how do you drive innovation to become bigger, better, faster, and stronger? I am very pleased that all of you could join from all over the world, albeit in a virtual fashion. And I'm hoping by next year, we'll be able to meet in person. So let's talk a little bit about some of the innovation that has happened over the last year. So as many of you remember, about this time last year is when we acquired Saltstack, the company. I'm really thrilled that we pushed hard and made that acquisition happen. Salt community as well as the Salt enterprise has become the anchor of all our configuration automation capabilities. And it is really fabulous how pretty much Salt has proliferated into every automation project that is out there at VMware. Now, heart of Saltstack is, of course, the Salt open source community. And Tom and I have spoken for many, many long hours on not only how do we continue to invest in the community, how do we nurture the community, but how do we kind of help the community find new use cases and drive more innovation. And over the last year, we have not been standstill. So let me talk a little bit about some of the innovations that have happened. So first of all, the adoption of Salt within VMware has been pretty prolific. It is exciting to see the Salt open source project being used not just by the management team, which is where Salt was acquired, and the vRealize team, but also by other units within VMware. Now you see Salt open source projects that are building content around vSphere, NSX, vSAN. Salt is being used to manage vCloud Foundation deployments. Salt is being used to manage VMware Cloud on AWS. And for networking use cases as well as security use cases. So it's very interesting that when the power of automation is truly unleashed, you find the individual users starting to pick up Salt and drive their own use cases. Now, as I have spoken earlier, Salt Open is, and the investment in community is very critical for VMware. By the way, the innovation and the investment in Salt community and Salt open source is not a one-off. Across VMware, we are seeing a strong adoption of open source technologies as well as strong contribution to open source communities. Notable among them is VMware's contribution to Kubernetes community as well as to the CNCF projects. So switching gears, I also want to talk about what we have been doing with Saltstack Enterprise. As you know, Saltstack Enterprise has powerful set of capabilities. We have adopted those capabilities completely, and they are now fully integrated into VMware product lines. Saltstack Enterprise is now natively available as a capability of vRealize automation and is part of our vRealize cloud suite. In addition, we have taken the Salt Enterprise capabilities and made it available both in the on-prem as well as the SaaS form factor, and it is available as part of vRealize Cloud Universal set of products. In addition to all the fabulous open source innovations, as well as all the integrations that we have done with Salt Enterprise, there is some exciting news I'd like to share. Today, we'd like to announce Project Item. Now, the goal of Project Item is to truly advance the notion of item potency for automation, being able to define the state of what you want and let the system make it happen. That is the ultimate definition of what Project Item can deliver for you. It is an open source Apache licensed project, and it truly is to drive next generation automation. Automation not just for endpoints, automation just not for agent-based approaches, but automation of any API endpoint, be it a cloud endpoint or vending machine for that matter. We really are very excited about this project and would love to have all of your contributions towards this project. Tom and team have really been putting blood, sweat, and tears to make this happen and make it available to the community. And I'm sure you'll hear more from Tom, but he would love to see all of your participation in it. So, by the way, just a story that I want to share. During the acquisition process, this was just a nub of an idea that in Tom's head. And when I heard about it, I was very excited. The ability to truly bring this powerful, highly scalable, next generation automation for any type of endpoint was very intriguing and appealing. And we chose to carve out capacity in order to truly dedicate to this project so that we can bring it out to you and the rest of the open source community. So again, I want to double down and thank Tom and team, but also I'd like to, again, encourage participation from all of you. Together, Salt and VMware truly have become bigger, better, faster, stronger. And I'm excited for all the sessions that all of you have put together and looking forward to hearing more from each one of you. It's now my privilege to introduce my good friend, creator of Salt and IDEM, Tom Hatch.
I want to start by saying thanks to Purnima for the fantastic introduction. And I want to talk briefly about what a phenomenal mentor and friend Purnima has been over this last year since VMware acquired Saltstack. It's been quite the roller coaster, if I'm completely honest. And Purnima's been there with us every step of the way. She was one of the primary champions for the acquisition of Saltstack and has done a great deal to help us as a company integrate, but also to take very good care of our open source community. And so I just want to emphasize before I move any further how grateful I am to Purnima, not only for championing the acquisition, but also bringing everything forward in such a fantastic way. Now, if we go back and we look at the acquisition of Saltstack by VMware, it was 1 year ago that we had SALTCONF right after Saltstack was acquired by VMware. And there was a lot of apprehension. And a lot of apprehension, especially inside of the open source community. We tried very hard with SALTCONF last year to alleviate some concerns that may have existed. It's not uncommon that a large company will acquire a company like Saltstack and not necessarily take care of all of the things that people value, especially when it comes to the open source nature of the Salt project. There were a lot of people who were concerned that VMware would potentially steamroll over many of the things that we hold quite precious as an open source community and an open source project. And I'm very pleased to be able to say that that certainly hasn't been the case. It's been a fantastic partnership as we've gone through our first year of integrating with VMware, learning how to take a company much smaller and make sure that it's able to function in an effective way inside of a large corporation like VMware. These apprehensions and these feelings of trepidation were, of course, very real for many of us, because when a large corporation comes in and acquires a company that has major open source projects, historically this has not always gone really well. Not all corporations understand how open source works, and there are many historic examples where large companies have come in and open source projects that have been brought into their fold have not been cared for in a positive and healthy way. This was a big concern as we were going into the acquisition, but also after. And it's a concern because of so many of these existing examples. It's really easy for us to look back and look at projects that once were incredibly dominant and see how they splintered very quickly and lost steam and momentum, even potentially reshaping the landscape of how we use certain software stacks because acquisitions were not managed cleanly when it came to open source. As this was a major concern moving into the acquisition of Saltstack by VMware, this was also something that was of top of mind, not only to me, but also many people inside of VMware. And at first we were nervous that there would be many people who didn't understand. But to my great pleasure, I'm able to say that inside of VMware, we quickly discovered that there were far more friends of open source than we had ever imagined, and far fewer enemies than we had conceived in our worst nightmares. It became very easy to realize that the situations where potentially bad decisions could have been made about the management of Salt and the open source Salt project, when we ran into situations, it was almost always a misunderstanding that, yes, doing certain things are going to be more damaging to an open source community. But it's also been fascinating to deepen my own understanding, as well as the understanding of people inside of Saltstack and VMware, about the tactics that we need to take towards getting the most out of the contribution that VMware makes to the Salt project and its community. Understanding what it means to be a corporation that is the primary sponsor of an open source project, but also understanding how we were able to take the power that exists inside of Salt and bringing that back into the fold of so many VMware products, while at the same time keeping the doors open to innovation. This understanding about how we monetize open source has been something that has fascinated me far more today than it did a year and a half ago before the acquisition process began. The options that we have to get Salt into more and more places are quite phenomenal. And having those options is something that has been a constant layer of excitement in my life. Rarely a few days go by that I don't have a new conversation about how we're going to integrate Salt deeper and deeper into VMware products. It's been fascinating to see how Salt's footprint has therefore become so much more significant because of the vast reach of VMware and our ability to get Salt software empowering so many products. It's been beyond exciting. And it reminded me of something that I want to talk about. It reminded me of one of my favorite movies. I think a lot of people who are watching this have probably seen this movie and enjoy it. It's a little older, but it's the old Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I remember watching this movie for the first time, of course, many, many years ago. And the first time I saw it, I was very confused by what Kirk said as he was battling Khan in the final scenes. And he kept saying that Khan is a two-dimensional thinker, and that Kirk needed to think three-dimensionally to be able to defeat Khan. This rattled around in my head for years, trying to understand what is it that Kirk is trying to say. As we go back and we look at those scenes in that old Star Trek movie, Kirk is very effective at being able to use the ecosystem around him to leverage the assets which he has at his disposal, to be able to drive towards the outcomes that he wants. So as Khan and Kirk are battling it out, Khan's focus is very narrow. He is obsessed merely with defeating Kirk. It's almost a Captain Ahab level of obsession. He ignores many of the opportunities that are in front of him. He ignores the fact that he doesn't need to defeat Kirk in this moment for him to move forward. He is simply obsessed. One of the things that are really interesting about Khan is also the fact that he's hyper-focused on his strengths. He's blinded by his own strength. And that blindness that comes from over-reliance on those things which Khan is very good at is what makes him and pushes him to make bad bets and bad gambles in a situation which is difficult and desperate. And so as we transition to how Kirk is handling the battlefield, he knows what sacrifices he does and doesn't have to take. He knows where to place his risks and also what elements of his ecosystem to use. Instead of focusing primarily on how he can directly damage his opponent, he's able to understand that achieving his goals means that he needs to leverage this broad ecosystem around him. The advanced and very honed training of his crew. The fact that he's next to a nebula and an asteroid, and that he has the Genesis device at his disposal, allows Kirk to realize that even though right in front of him he has far fewer assets than his enemy, if he takes the big picture into account, he has far more assets at his disposal. By leveraging that ecosystem and leveraging the broader assets which he has, he's able to achieve the goal which he is focused on achieving, which is, of course, winning the battle in front of him. But he's able to do it with far more resources at his disposal than his opponent perceives that he has. This is at the very essence of what it means to develop open source technology inside of and through a corporation like VMware. When we look at the broader ecosystem that exists and the wide tech landscape, being able to come back and say, VMware is able to touch and influence, but also absorb and learn from that broader ecosystem, is primarily what a company like VMware is able to get from their contributions and their aggressive sponsorship of SALT project. Being able to bring in those ideas, those concepts, and those capabilities allows a corporation like VMware to not just be able to look at an open source project and say, we've got people who use SALT and maybe we can upsell them on VMware products. But it broadens the entire view and visibility of VMware as a company. It allows VMware to realize that giving SALT project the freedom that it needs to innovate, to grow, and to iterate also feeds back into VMware knowledge, capabilities, and innovations, and visibility into the working minds of those who are actively working inside of tech and inside of these problem spaces to give information in that can be leveraged to develop new products that are targeting the right things for the right products. And so let me shift a little bit in our understanding of this situation, and I'll continue to use the Wrath of Khan. When we come back and we look at this situation of two starships battling it out, you've got things that are obviously weapons, like phasers, things that are obviously defensive, like shields. And then you have things which are not obviously weapons and not obviously defensive, like Kirk going into the nebula Now, when we come back and are able to look at the things that are not obviously offensive when it comes to developing products and getting a broader view of how to address an ecosystem, having that insight into that which is not obviously a weapon, but makes up the very physical nature of what's going on around us, gives us incredible insight as to how to use the very obvious and direct capabilities that we have. This is something that's always fascinated me as I've been an amateur military historian for many years, understanding that the terrain matters so much, but that short-sightedness in the way that we develop products and look at a market so often pulls us away from the really great things that we can build. And so what I want to emphasize here is that the reason I have confidence in our situation and our position with VMware is because I know that VMware understands and that the executives in VMware understand that what we are doing has to do with that broad view of an ecosystem. It's not simply trying to find the targets to fire at, but knowing that the entirety of the landscape is critical. Now, the understanding that we have about this landscape becomes much more apparent when we look at some of the things that we've been able to do inside of VMware for Salt Project. We've been able to redirect a lot of resources towards Salt Project. And I'll admit, we've had hiccups, of course. Nothing ever goes as smooth as we would like. But to my great excitement, we've been able to open source many pieces of code that were not open sourced before, like the Delta proxy. We've been able to put more resources into the engineering team and reorganize it to work in a much more effective and efficient way, so that we're able to target more innovative ideas and concepts. We've been able to start thinking about how Salt can be used in ways other than it was originally used for. One of the big challenges that I had with Salt early on was that Salt got pulled into configuration management in a big way. And many of you have heard me say this before. But I didn't build Salt initially as a configuration management system, despite the fact that it is, I will argue, the best configuration management system available. It was originally built with many other capabilities in mind. We are beginning to now have the ability to explore those capabilities in ways that we just didn't have leeway and bandwidth to do before. As we come back and we look at our ability to use Salt as an incredibly robust agent for data collection, as we look at Salt's ability to actively monitor very dynamic systems and components, we look at Salt's ability to build bridges between different applications, and we look at Salt's ability to do device management in ways that other management platforms simply don't have the ability to do. Being able to take that broad Salt management philosophy, we have been able to not only make that useful for more VMware products, sure, but we're also beginning to see how we can make that more useful to a broader open source ecosystem, how the capabilities of Salt can be exposed for more use cases. And this is something that I'm very excited about, and something that we're going to be seeing in the upcoming year, as we're going to be working towards exposing Salt's capabilities to more use cases, being able to look back at the many things that people have done with Salt over the years and highlighting them, and being able to very clearly and concisely show how Salt can be used to solve problems that many of you listening have already been using Salt to solve. Now, With all of this excitement around SALT, there are a few other things that I would like to talk about. 2 years ago at SALTCONF, we announced a few highly experimental projects. One of them was called POP. Now, I put a lot of energy into POP. POP stands for Plugin Oriented Programming. Inside of SALT, we have a plugin system, the SALT Loader, which abstracts a more aggressive way to look at plugins than a lot of software developers have thought of over the years. When we come back and we look at plugin-oriented programming and the SALT Loader, I realized early on that making more and more interfaces inside of a software platform pluggable was a huge benefit to the overall design of software. And years ago, I said, what would it look like if I made this capability standalone? And so I started working on a standalone plugin system based on the SALT Loader. And I iterated over it many, many times until I realized that I had actually developed a programming paradigm, that I had unintentionally started writing software in a very fundamentally different way. Once I realized this, I started to codify what it means to write software using plugin-oriented programming. Subsequently, I came out with a platform called POP, which we began to use at Saltstack for many of our products and new projects. It became almost universal in its usage inside of Saltstack. We were able to rapidly develop very powerful platforms using POP. And the enterprise component that we have, but also a number of other pieces of software that we've produced, have been built on top of this POP technology. And that leads into the next thing that I want to talk about. Purnima announced the ITEM project. We've been working very hard on ITEM. ITEM was originally announced as a R&D project 2 years ago at SALTCONF. When Saltstack was acquired by Vmware, they came and they asked about how we think cloud automation should be done. We talked a little bit about, well, we've got this thing called ITEM, and we think that we can expose some next generation capabilities through it. Big thanks to Purnima, who looked at it and said, I'm going to put some research teams on this, see what they come back with. To my excitement and relief, these research teams came back with a rather glowing outlook of ITEM and its capabilities. They came back saying that POP is a very smart way to write software. And they gave us some more enhancements on top of the ITEM platform. I spent a lot of time working with people inside of VMware to make sure that ITEM could solve use cases that I hadn't necessarily seen beforehand, and that it would be able to not only integrate in a VMware scale, but also be standalone and worthwhile in its own right. And so we're very excited at the fact that today we've been able to expand ITEM and its cloud automation capabilities significantly, but also that we're able to talk about the fact that ITEM is much more than simply a cloud automation platform. But ITEM is really made to be able to declaratively and through an ITEM-potent mechanism express the state of really anything that can be controlled via an API, and do so at an incredible speed and with really next generation techniques. And so I'm very excited that we're able to bring ITEM into the fold and that it's been able to get more attention. I'm very excited that there's so much enthusiasm about it inside of VMware, and that we're beginning to get more and more energy placed behind it. And the last thing that I'm very excited about with ITEM is that it is open source and Apache licensed. And so the work that we're doing here is going to be open and available for a community to view, use, and contribute to, and is available today. And so I strongly encourage people to look up ITEM and give us some feedback as we get this project closer and closer to being able to really live up to its potential. I'm quite deeply thrilled that all of you have come to SALTCONF again this year. It's another virtual conference. As COVID continues to march forward, it's been very difficult for us to see each other face to face. And if I'm honest, I think everyone's getting pretty sick of hearing heartfelt, sappy remarks around how much we miss seeing people face to face. But I sincerely do miss seeing all of you face to face. I look back 2 years to the last time we had SALTCONF in person. And many of the friends that I have not been able to shake hands with for a very, very long time because of the pandemic. And I look forward to a time where we will be able to shake hands and speak in person again. And hopefully that time is soon, and that we are able to come together and overcome the problems that we all have to endure and fight inside of this pandemic. But for now, I'm thrilled that we can work together and communicate and talk and collaborate virtually. We put a lot of work into this year's SALTCONF, and we're incredibly excited to have everyone here. Now, with that said, I want to now introduce our community manager, Jimmy Chunga. Now, some of you may know Jimmy Chunga. He is my co-host on The Hacks, and together we have a fantastic podcast. And I've been working with Chunga for quite a few years now, as he's helped to promote Salt, Saltstack, and now working very directly with the open source community and being able to focus a lot of energy on Salt Project. And so I'm excited to be able to introduce Jimmy Chunga, our community manager, who will be able to tell you some more wonderful things about SALTCONF and some of the more exciting things that we're going to be able to be talking about and covering in this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. It's a very nice introduction, and thank you to our good friend Purnima for taking the time to be a part of SALTCONF 21. Once again, we're honored to have you here and very excited about what the coming days will hopefully bring you. I want to say a huge thank you to all of you who have welcomed me into the SALT community as the new community manager. It's an honor, to say the least. And I also want to say a huge thank you to Janae Andrus for the amazing work that she did as my predecessor. And although she has moved on to other opportunities, our good friend Janae was instrumental in the success of SALTCONF 21. So huge thanks, Janae. We owe you one. We want to say thank you to Adam Cannon. Adam is our sessions and moderators manager. He's been working with all of our speakers and all of our moderators, and that work has been tremendous. So thank you to Adam Cannon as well. A couple of things I'd like you to be aware of over the coming days. Our good friend Tom Hatch is going to be speaking a lot. There are many breakout sessions that will feature Tom Hatch, including his dreaded AMAs. Don't know if you're aware of this, but Tom hates AMAs. So I'd like to encourage all of you to hop on the agenda, take a look at when that AMA is taking place, and join him and ask a lot of questions, a lot of very uncomfortable questions. It's just my little thank you to Tom. Also, something else I think you should be aware of, this is happening tomorrow on Thursday. It will be the last thing that we do to close out SALTCONF 21. It's our demo jam. Last year, the demo jam was a huge success. We all had a great time with it. It was irreverent. It was at times inappropriate, and it was always fun. So we have 6 competitors this year at our demo jam. We'd like to invite all of you to join us. Tom Hatch and I will be the hosts. We will be your MCs for this year's demo jam. Something else that we're really focused on this year are our networking hours. Now, we've always had these, but we haven't really focused on them in years past. At SALTCONF 21, bigger, better, faster, stronger, we feel that the ability to network and getting to know new professionals in our space is extremely important, not only to your individual career, but to the art of innovation in general. And that's something we feel has been tragically missing as a result of the pandemic. So for this year, we're going to have 2 networking hours per day. One right around lunch hour, and one as the last hour of each day. Here's how the networking hours are going to work. Simply click on the networking hours tile in your schedule, and you'll be randomly connected to another SALTCONF 21 attendee. Once in, you'll be able to chat with that person for around 2 minutes before our system shuffles the deck and randomly connects you to a new person. If you're having a great conversation and you feel like you need more time, you do have the option to extend your allocated time for as long as needed. We highly recommend you take advantage of this feature and expand your network and your circle of influence. And finally, our labs and our contests. I believe there may be some spots open. Space is limited both for the labs and the contests, but I'd encourage you to take part in those as well. If you're a new SALT user, if you're a new member of our SALT community, or if you just like to brush up on your SALT skills in certain areas, the labs are a great opportunity for you to do this. If you know SALT inside and out, you're fluid, and you'd like to embarrass your friends and enemies with your supreme knowledge of SALT, well, then the contests are for you. So head to saltconf.com and make sure you get yourself signed in. I think there are a couple of spots still available if you haven't already done so. Next up, I have the honor of announcing our SALT Project Community Champion for 2021. Congratulations to Gary Geeson, Director of Network Services at eGate Networks.
Thanks, Chunga. Wow, community champion. I'm not sure a guy who heckles, annoys, and in general is a thorn in the side of a lot of the core team is deserving of such an honor, but nevertheless, I'm thankful. The fact I'm here is really a testament to how much access VMware provides to the SALT team and how many resources they pour into the community. With wonderful programs they support like Wayne Werner's Test Clinic, where Wayne streams on Twitch and helps people write tests for their code. The Hacks podcast, where great personalities Chunga and Tom dissertate on many a topic. SALT Air, which help onboard newcomers to the basics of SALT. Virtual meetups, which allow the community to dive in depth on a particular topic. The ever-present open hour, where the community comes together to ask questions and present solutions to the SALT core team. And jams, where SALT brings together a community to hyper-focus on an area that needs some help. And the numerous working groups, where almost anyone can find somewhere they can contribute to SALT. There are few projects that can match the level of support and access SALT grants to their community. And I think the community responds to that. I know I did. Thank you very much.
Once again, congratulations, Gary, and thanks for all of the contributions you've made to SALT Project over the past year. And with that, on with the show. Welcome to SALTCONF 21.